This brief video is intended to explain how I want you to write the case studies for the biomedical ethics class. Remember that you have a case study paper. You should check the syllabus or the course website to determine the exact date and time it is due. Plus, you will have a case study that is one of your final exam essays. I will provide you a list of scenarios, all of which involve some kind of a moral dilemma from the healthcare setting. All of them will focus on the actions of a particular individual in the scenario, and all will require you to decide which course of action in the case is obligatory, or why several may be permissible. You should only write on the scenarios I identify. Your tasks in the paper are first to analyze the scenario using our 5 moral principles and other theoretical concepts. Particularly, you are to identify what makes the case a moral dilemma. That usually involves identifying the principles that are in conflict in the case. One determining you or suggesting you should do one thing, another principle or another interpretation of the principle suggesting you should do something else. You should then identify your resolution of the case and both justify and defend that resolution. Are you giving your opinion about the case? Absolutely. There are 2 key concepts that you need to understand to be able to write the cases. The first is the idea of a moral dilemma and what that means. And the second is the idea that our principles are prima facie considerations rather than absolute. With respect to the idea that cases are moral dilemmas, recall the simple scenario I envisioned earlier in the course where I have made you a promise to meet you at my office in order to help you work on course material. But on the way to my office, I come upon a stranger who is badly injured and desperately in need of my help. Now, if I help that person, I will have to break my promise to you that I would meet you in my office. That promise to you generates an obligation related to the principle of fidelity. I have an obligation to live up to your legitimate expectation that I fulfill the promise and show up at my office to help you. But beneficence would suggest that I have an obligation to help the stranger. After all, he's desperately injured, and I'm the only one around who can help, and my help is necessary in order to save his life. So this is sort of a classic, simple moral dilemma in the sense that 2 significant moral considerations, my obligation to keep my promise, to live up to my obligations of fidelity to you, is in conflict with my obligation to help the stranger. Now, it's a relatively easily resolvable dilemma, but it's a moral dilemma of a sort nonetheless, because 2 significant moral considerations point in different directions. Now, the second thing you need to understand, of course, for this is the idea of prima facie moral considerations. We have said that each of our principles are prima facie. That means they do point to things that make a difference morally, to things that really matter, like whether an action is harmful or coercive or manipulative. But they are not absolute in the sense that there may well be situations in which the right thing to do means violating that principle and not honoring the significant moral qualities of an act to which the principles point. Our principles are not absolute. They do matter, but they can be overridden, so they are prima facie. The first paragraph of your case study is terribly important and should include 4 elements. First, it should involve a brief review of the facts of the case, focusing particularly on those that are most morally relevant. You should then identify the conflict that makes the case a moral dilemma, identifying the principles that are in conflict with one another. Then, of course, you should identify the course of action you think ethically best. This is not a mystery novel where we only find out your conclusion at the end. We need to know the direction you are taking us from the beginning. And then finally, offer just a brief summary of your reasoning as to why you think the resolution you've offered is the best one. Just a brief summary of that reasoning. You will develop it throughout the rest of the paper. Consider this scenario called Grandma's respirator. Basically, here you are John, who has to make a decision with reference to his grandmother, who is extremely ill. I won't read you the case, but you should take the time to read it here and get the essential details. Okay, here is what one possible first paragraph might look like with each of the four elements. First, the brief review of the facts. John must decide whether or not to withdraw the respirator from his grandmother, who's thought to be permanently paralyzed and unable to communicate with or respond to friends. The case involves a conflict between non-maleficence and both beneficence and autonomy. To withdraw the respirator will harm her by hastening her death, but not to withdraw it will violate her apparent desire not to live in such a state. Moreover, given her low quality of life, a more rapid death might be in her best interest. It would be wrong for John to decide to remove the respirator, because preserving life, even when the quality of life is low, is our most important moral responsibility, and John's grandmother's own wishes are only vaguely known. Now, be clear, I am not suggesting that's the right resolution of the case. I'm just suggesting what a resolution in that direction might look like, what a good first paragraph might look like. Indeed, let me offer you an example of another, of what the first paragraph would look like with a different resolution of the case. Notice the facts here are the same. The description of the conflict is the same. But here the resolution is different. John should have the respirator removed, both because, given her low quality of life, extending her life is of no true benefit to her, and because this is not how she would want to live. All right? So do you see the facts are the same, the description of the conflict is the same, but obviously a different resolution and a different summary of the kind of reasoning one is want to offer to justify their resolution of the case. So be clear, in most of these cases, I don't think there is any clear right or wrong answer, or certainly no answer that is one that any intelligent, reasonable person would have to arrive at. Good and reasonable people could come to different conclusions about almost any of these scenarios. Immediately after that first paragraph, you should begin the justification of your resolution. This is your most important task, explaining why your resolution or judgment about the case is the right one. You will clarify and explain in much greater detail than you did in that summary of your reasoning in the first paragraph why the judgment you make about a person's course of action in the case, or why you propose the course of action you propose. Clarify, explain, deepen the justification you are offering for that judgment. It's important to draw upon course material, the lectures and readings that are supportive of your decision and your reasoning. Of course, one of the things that I'm trying to evaluate uh, in this case study is not simply your ability to make a moral argument, but also your familiarity with the course material that's relevant to that argument, and your ability to use that course material to support your reasoning. The next thing you will do is defend your resolution of the case against alternatives. That is to say, after you offer your justification, you should then offer an explanation for why someone might disagree with you. In a good case study, you anticipate counter positions and counter arguments rather than simply ignore them. And you should make the best possible presentation of that counter argument. You should offer no straw person arguments. A straw person argument is one in which you say, well, some people would say this, and then you give a completely silly or explanation of why someone would believe that. No, you should offer an explanation that makes that alternative perspective look as strong and valid as it can possibly look. You should offer an explanation for it that a person who holds that position would actually agree with and say, yeah, that's what I believe, and that's why I believe it. You should avoid name calling. Simply labeling a particular argument with a name is not moral reasoning. You should also avoid rhetorical questions. A rhetorical question is one in which you're not really anticipating an answer, but you're raising the question to make a point. So, for example, you might say, well, how could anyone think that she would want to live this way? Now, when you say it like that, you're meaning only an idiot would think that. But if you use rhetorical questions, my comment is going to be, your job was to tell us how someone could think that, and then why you think that reasoning is wrong. Or how could anyone think that it's wrong to remove the respirator? Well, you explain how someone might argue for or reason that it's wrong to remove the respirator. And if you're arguing for removing the respirator, tell me then why that argument counter to yours is unpersuasive to you. Again, avoid rhetorical questions. You're supposed to be answering those questions and then explaining why the reasoning offered for them is not persuasive to you. As with your justification for the resolution you're offering, you should draw upon the course material that challenges your decision and reasoning. You should, again, display your familiarity with course material, with ideas from the course, with articles from the course that might, in fact, support coming to the conclusion you disagree with. Of course, the bottom line here is you need to show why those alternative arguments, those alternative perspectives, and the reasons behind them simply are not persuasive to you. Be sure to pay attention to the grading rubric and the weight that's given to each of these things that I will be evaluating. You will see there that it will be looking at whether or not your first paragraph has the 4 required elements and how good of a job you do with each of those elements. Then it will ask, is your justification clear and potentially persuasive? And in making that justification or offering that justification, do you draw upon the course material that's supportive of your resolution of the case? Then I'll look and I'll ask, is your description of counter-arguments accurate? Are you fair to the perspective of those who would disagree with you? And do you draw upon the course material that challenges your perspective and your argument? And then, of course, do you offer a clear and potentially persuasive response to that counter-argument? And the last element is with respect to your writing. Is it clear? Does it have good syntax and punctuation? Is it well organized? Of course, I have given you the organization for the paper as a whole in this explanation of how to write the paper. But I'll also be looking at whether your paragraphs are well organized so that folks can understand what it is you are trying to say. Okay, I hope this has been helpful to you in understanding how to write the case studies, but I'm sure it's also maybe produced some questions. Feel free to contact me and ask for any clarification you need with reference to the case studies. Hope this has been helpful. Thanks.